It is going to be our fall is for veggie planting. Of course, we have Dan Alexander here, a wonderful presentator about all the different things that we've had for over the years of different veggies and all different topics he's talked about. So we're excited about this one for our 2024 fall is for planting. I'm going to pass it over to you, Dan. Thanks.
Thank you, Taylor. Hi, everybody. Welcome. It's a nice, thick, foggy, cool morning here in Mill Valley and probably around the bay, and gonna burn off and be nice and warm today and then get hotter next couple of days. You can see I'm surrounded here by all kinds of plants, and this is just to indicate that the fall is really a wonderful time for planting a lot of different things. We're going to focus on vegetables here today, but as you can see, I've got a lot of colorful things here as well. And we'll talk briefly about why they're here and some of the things you can do with them. I've got a barrel over here to my right that was planted up about 3 weeks ago, and we'll talk about what's growing in that. And we're going to plant up a few things here just so that everybody understands how to do that. We're figuring we have a range of gardening experience out there in the world, and probably some people who are new to the Bay Area and may not in their previous locations have had a fall planting season the way we do. Many parts of the country are starting to close up for the winter now and getting ready for cold weather, and we're just about to enjoy October and early November as some of the nicest weather we have in the Bay Area. Our focus from the vegetable point of view is on not things that make fruit that require a lot of sugar, but things that make leaves and that make flower buds that we eat. And it doesn't take as much energy as making sweet fruits like tomatoes and peppers and that sort of thing, or fruit from a tree for that matter. You need more sunshine and more warm weather to do that. And so this time of year, we're focusing mainly on a group of plants called the brassicas, which is the mustard family or cabbage family, which is a whole range of different things that we eat very commonly, most of our diets, from kale to broccoli and cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, cabbages, arugula even, and spinaches are a little different family, but also like cool weather. And peas are a prime crop for cool weather months. After the beans have given up after the warm summer, then the peas take over from fall through winter and spring. So lots of things to play with, and I brought some flowers here that grow nicely during the cool weather as well, that you can start integrating in your vegetable garden, or just refresh your seasonal pots with some new color that'll last through the winter. I have here to my left what we sort of generically call a pollinator pot, which was put together maybe 2 weeks ago, with some yarrow and sage, and this is Russian sage, and there's a basil hiding in there with these little purple flowers, and things that the different kinds of bees and hoverflies and other pollinators like to feed on during the fall, and it'll keep blooming through the fall and make a nice show during the cool weather. We probably ought to have just, I always do this, a little tiny basic botany lesson so that we're all on the same page of how do plants work anyway, and why do we give them the resources that we give them so that they can do their thing for us. They're little factories that work on the energy from the sun, and through photosynthesis, they're able to turn the energy from the sun into chemicals that become carbohydrates and proteins and fats. that end up being nutritious for us and other plant eaters. And then the plant eaters can turn that into meat, and we can even eat some of that. So it all comes down to sunshine. And that's why vegetable gardens generally are best out in full sun, so that the plants can use that to the best of their ability. During these cooler fall months, when the sun's starting to get a little lower, there's not as much energy being given to the plants. And so the plants have adapted to be more leafy and to store more of their nutritional energy in the leaves or in the flower buds. So things like broccoli and cauliflower are actually the buds, the flower buds that are growing up from the plant. And if you were to leave the broccoli on the stem and not pick it when it's a little tight bud, it would turn into yellow flower, kind of like this mustard flower over here. And then it would still be edible because all parts of the brassicas are edible, but it probably wouldn't be as palatable for you as the tight little broccoli buds are. These days, all kinds of interesting new broccolis and cauliflowers are constantly coming out with different colors and different nutritional profiles. Some of them are really interesting. This is a purple broccoli that's really pretty, that gets even darker purple when you steam it a little bit or cook it.
Does it taste different?
It doesn't really taste any different. And this is broccoli, I mean cheddar cauliflower, which is a beautiful color. And cauliflowers now are available in purples and chartreuses and very interesting colors other than just the white. And the colored ones are more nutritious than the white cauliflower. They have more of the antioxidants in them that are indicated by the color. It's anthocyanins that make the color, and those are antioxidants that we think are good for us. So lots of things. Keep your eye out for new varieties and interesting varieties. My feeling is why grow something yourself that you can easily get in the store? Grow something more interesting that you're not going to see in the grocery store, and that can be unique for your garden, and you can add your own produce to the different colors that you get in the grocery store. And that's true for things like lettuces, for instance. You can get probably a dozen different varieties of lettuce if you go to maybe 2 or 3 different nurseries. You're not going to find them all probably at one nursery, but there are lots of them available, and they have really interesting, different colorations and textures. And this is a lettuce mix called Wildfire that's pretty readily available, probably at the nurseries, but you're not going to find it at the grocery store, except maybe in a mesclun mix that's going to cost you, $15 a pound. So I mean, lettuce is so easy to grow. There's no reason not to do it. And you can mix the lettuces with some of the different, kales, or this is Mizuno, which I don't know if a lot of people know what it's about, but it's a kind of mustard. And again, since it's a brassica, every bit of it is edible. I mean, probably you wouldn't eat the roots because there's mixed up with the dirt. But Mizuna is a very mild mustard. It hardly tastes mustardy at all, but it has an interesting flavor and texture. And you can always throw a few of it's constantly throwing up flowers as well. So you can always just pinch off the end and throw the flowers in the salad as well for a little color and a little The flavor is kind of grassy, I would say, and a little more intense than the leaves. So you get these little sort of flavor bombs from the flowers that take you by surprise a little bit. And you go, oh, boy, that's neat.
Plus it looks pretty.
And it looks pretty, and it's really easy to grow. It's very forgiving and grows quickly. And most of the leafy vegetables, for me anyway, the best way to harvest them is just to pick off individual leaves. So you kind of go to the lower leaves and pinch them off, and then if you were throwing this into a salad, you'd probably want to pinch off the stem a little bit because they get a little bit tougher as they grow. And this one's been around for a little while. So if I bite off the stem end, it's a little chewy. But if it were a younger leaf, it wouldn't be, and it would be just perfect. So, test it. If it's too tough, don't put it in the salad. But see, the green part is fine. I get my greens here as I talk.
We're going to do this class where Dan ends up making a salad at the end.
There we go. This is spinach. And spinach is another cool weather crop, and it really easy to harvest. A leaf here and a leaf there. And again, these baby leaves are great for salads, very tender, tasty. You could saute them or steam them, but they're so delicious the way they are that it's almost a shame to do that. You might as well use the older leaves to steam or saute, and because they'll be a little too tough for the salad. But when they're young like this, just add them as baby greens to the salad. And then bigger crops like choys again are extremely easy to grow. I mean, it's like you put them in and ignore them, and they just grow like crazy. And I like to stir fry these, especially with garlic or onion and mushrooms, and just as the sort of side veggie dish. Choy comes in, again, a dozen different varieties of choy that mainly have to do with color and size of the leaves. Some of them are quite small and some of them are quite red. But they're all very easy to eat. They don't have a strong flavor, but they have a nice vegetable-y flavor. And I highly recommend growing choy. Great for containers and a relatively quick crop. They're not going to be there for months and months and months. They're going to get to a certain point and you're going to want to eat them. And you can either pick individual leaves or you can wait till they kind of head up a little bit and then take the whole thing and then kind of chop it up and throw it in the stir fry. And you've got lots of veggies that way. The classic brassicas, I would say, are the broccoli. Broccoli ends up being a pretty big plant. You need a little bit of room for it. And I recommend about 18 inches between broccoli plants because they're quite muscly. And Jen, if we can swing over here to the barrel that got planted up. This is the Chico broccoli, which is an old Italian heirloom variety. And you can see, I think there are 6 in here, kind of around the circle of the barrel. And interplanted with the broccoli are snap peas or sugar peas. I don't know which, because I think this was a 6-pack of peas that lost their label, and that's why they ended up in the barrel. So we don't know what variety they are, but they're a climbing variety. Can tell that from the tendrils and the way they're hanging on to the tomato cage here in the middle. So the peas are going to climb up the middle, and the broccoli is growing around. And
Very cool.
if we look down below, sort of part the waves here, you can see there there's a bunch of marigolds popping up here. They're not really seasonal now, but there were marigolds previously in this barrel, and so they've gone to seed and they're starting to grow. They may not give us flowers, but they're fun to see. And then all those little green guys, I suspect, although I don't know for sure, are violas, which were also growing in the barrel previously, and they've left lots of seeds behind. And so we'll see if that's true, and we'll let a few of them grow because they do very nicely throughout the winter. This is a nice little demonstration garden of how you can, in a fairly small space, get some big plants going fairly quickly. And the DeChico broccoli will make kind of a medium-sized head right at the top of the broccoli, and we'll chop that off and harvest it, and then it'll send out side branches that'll give smaller heads, but quite a number of them for quite a while. And again, since this is a brassica, every bit of it is edible. And here's a really fresh new little leaf. Delicious. I mean, this is like nutty. It's got a little heat. The kind of heat that it has isn't like a pepper. It's more like horseradish, which is also a brassica. And the chemical is completely different, but it gives you just barely a hint of that when it's raw. When they're cooked, they don't have any of that.
Hey, Dan, before you step away from that pot right there,
Yeah.
one question I had earlier, which I answered a little bit, but just talking a little bit about the thing that every gardener deals with is the little pests and bugs. I see some little holes in some of the leaves we have here. Can you speak on that just for a moment?
Yeah. These holes are probably made by the little white butterflies that you see fluttering over all of the brassicas. They're commonly called cabbage whites, the butterflies, and they lay eggs on the brassicas, and little tiny green caterpillar eats the brassica and makes the holes in the leaves. I don't worry about it. These holes aren't big enough to bother the plant, and unless there were hundreds of little caterpillars just denuding it, it's all part of nature. And butterflies and caterpillars are an important part of the ecosystem. As we learned from Doug Tallamy some time ago, if there were no caterpillars in the world, there would be no baby birds, because they are the primary source of food that current birds feed their babies. And so I myself have gotten into the mindset that says, oh, holes, there are caterpillars, that's wonderful. As long as they're not taking over the world. Live with them, appreciate them. And if you have to, you can check the undersides of the leaves, pick off, if you've got a bunch of them, enough that you can actually see them doing their work. Pick them off, flick them into a bowl of soapy water, and you can control them pretty well that way. If they get out of hand, Bacillus thuringiensis or the Captain Jack's dead bug brew, either one of those will take care of caterpillars. But generally speaking, there's no need to worry about them. And the peas have very few bugs that eat them. Usually not a problem at all.
Thank you. Yeah, it looks really good too. I mean, even just everything's growing in, even with a little bit of holes, they're all flush and full. So I think it's a great answer there.
Now, there are lots of varieties of kale, lots of varieties of broccoli. Let's talk a little bit about kale, because it's a superfood. Whatever that means, lots of vitamins and minerals and things like that. Toscano kale, also known as dinosaur kale or lacinato kale, those are all just names for the same variety of kale, is probably the most popular kale It's certainly the one that people buy most here. And it's wonderful, but it's not the only game in town. Red Russian kale has leaves that are even more tender than lacinato. Maybe the fact that they're kind of raggedy on the edges makes people think that maybe they wouldn't be as easy to eat, but they are. And they have interesting different colorations as they mature. So don't overlook the Red Russian. And a variety of kale that was developed out of Red Russian is scarlet kale, which is even more stunning in its color. And remember, the more color, the more antioxidants, generally speaking. So go for color when you can. And this is what's called blue Vates kale or curly kale. Sometimes it's called a collard, blue Vates collard. And the reason it can be called a collard or a kale is that those are just names that people give to plants. Botanically, they are collards and kale are the same plant, as are broccoli and cabbages. They're all the same, but we have selected them over eons to look a little differently. And so some people might call this a collard and some people might call it a kale, but it's the same thing. And it has a lovely color and great flavor as well. So don't overlook it. Whether the label says collard or kale is irrelevant. I know that people don't grow collards around here the way some areas of the world do. But let's see, did I bring a tree collard here? Oh, maybe I didn't. Do we have a tree collard? No. Anyway, there are things called tree collards, which are a perennial. It looks like a giant kale, and it has big leaves, and is the traditional collard that in the South, if you're going to do collard greens, that it's from a tree collard. And they are available around here, and they'll grow up about 6 feet tall and are easy to reproduce by taking a cutting off of it and just rooting the cutting. They don't make flowers, and so there aren't seeds available for tree collards. You can only get them by making a cutting off of another tree collard. And there's a kind of a funny big effort to preserve some of the old traditional heirloom tree collards that exist. There's some people who go around driving the back roads in the South, looking over people's fences
No kidding.
for their tree collards, and then asking them if they can take a piece of the tree collard, and so that they preserve all these different varieties of tree collards that exist out there. But if you see one, grab it and give it a try, because they're really interesting plants and very nutritious. Again, this family uses a lot of calcium and is full of calcium. It's one of the best sources of calcium that isn't, milk or something like that. And they do that by having deep roots and drawing the calcium up from far below, and then making it available to us. So nutritionally, they're terrific. Now, in addition to the
I do have one question actually about kales and collards and all the brassicas. And I didn't fully know the answer, but I don't think it's a problem. If you have an area that you're planting in one year and then next year you want to plant them again, is there any issue with replanting them in the same spot like some other plants?
No, that's one of the nice things about them. They have around here, they have very few problems. The cabbage moth is probably the biggest problem that they have. Occasionally you can get soil-borne pests, but it's unusual, and you will know it if you have it. The plants will suffer and die, and when you pull them out, you'll see little bugs in the roots. But that's very unusual around here. So there's really no problem like that. It's not like your tomatoes or potatoes that you have to be more careful with. And you can compost old cabbage family plants in your home compost without any problem. I don't recommend you doing that with your tomatoes. Put those in your green can so they can be professionally heat composted and get rid of all the pathogens that invariably are on them by the end of the season. And tiny segue, you may be asking yourself, how do I plant all of this stuff when I've already got my tomatoes and my peppers and other things growing away still here in September? And maybe they're going to go on into October. How do I do that? Well, two ways. One is do some triage on your existing plants, and the ones that are going downhill fast, get rid of them. There's no point in trying to baby them along when they're on their last legs. So if the tomato vines are starting to get really janky and they're not really ripening up the fruit anymore, pull them out and put them in the green can. And that'll make some room. And if they're all going gangbusters, more power to them. And but start intercropping with young things like lettuces and broccolis and cauliflowers, and just plant them alongside, add a little compost and manure, and get them going right along with the existing plants. They'll actually appreciate a little bit of the shade that the big plants might give them when we have the occasional heat wave still, like we're supposed to have Monday and Tuesday, or maybe even starting tomorrow, 2 or 3 days of hotter weather where the newly planted plants can go, hey, I told you I was a cool weather plant, and here you plant me out and there's a heat wave. What's going on here? Well, a little bit of shade doesn't hurt a bit. And one tool that's kind of handy to have for exactly this situation where you might plant your cool weather plants and it suddenly gets hot is a little bit of shade cloth, which is just a I should have brought in a piece here, but it's a piece of fabric that has kind of large spaces between the fibers that lets some sun through and lots of air and water can go through, but it'll shade the plant enough in really hot weather that it'll appreciate it. And you can, for young plants, you can just lay it on top. You don't have to make a hoop or keep it off of them. You can just lay it on top. It's not going to crush them. And it's very handy to have. Another little trick when the weather suddenly gets hot is you may find that some of your new plantings are wilting. If the soil's moist and the plant is wilting, the last thing you want to do is water it more. The water pushes the oxygen out of the soil. The roots desperately need the oxygen. And the plant is wilting in order to protect itself from the fact that the roots can't get the water up to the leaves fast enough. So the trick is not to water the soil more. You can mist the plants themselves a little bit, but it's better to shade them a little bit. So, if you've got an old umbrella, stick the old umbrella out there. If you've got a piece of shade cloth, throw it over. If you need to put a cardboard box over it, put a cardboard box over it. And the way you can tell that that's what's really happening is that at night they'll perk back up. By morning they'll look fine. And then if it's hot the next day, then they wilt again by 2 o'clock or something like that when it gets really hot. So just keep in mind that watering is not always the answer when you have wilting going on. Now, in addition to these leafy vegetables and that sort of thing, this is also a great time of year to plant giant thistles. This is an artichoke, and this is an artichoke. Fall is the time to plant these if you want to have artichokes next spring. If you buy them like this next spring, you're not going to have artichokes until the following spring. So get the artichokes in the ground now, and you will happily have some artichokes in the spring. This is also a wonderful time to plant strawberries. Not because this guy's a little unusual. He's giving us a strawberry here in September. You'll get a few in September, but the main time for strawberries is June. And if you plant them in March, April, May, you're not going to get very many strawberries in June. But if you plant them now, they're going to grow through the winter and they're going to give you lots and lots of strawberries in June. And if you have an ever-bearing variety, they'll continue to give you some berries through the summer. This is Seascape, which is a very nice commercial ever-bearing variety that is a heavy producer. But you know, they're wimpy now, and they need to grow for a while before they can make lots of flowers and fruit. This is a kind of a specialty variety. Get in there. This is Elan, and unfortunately there aren't any flowers visible right now, but it has a really beautiful pink flower, and then tasty strawberries. Strawberries. Most strawberries aren't available as certified organic because the crowns that even the organic growers have to buy aren't produced organically. But some of them are, and they usually come in these 3.5-inch pots. So they cost more per plant than this jumbo pack, the 6-packs cost per plant. But these are certified organic, and then people ask, how can you tell it's certified organic? And I don't know if this shows up in the picture, but see the little circular logo there? It says USDA organic. And there are several similar certifying organizations. There's the California one, says California Department of Agriculture, CBA. And they'll have some indication on them that they're organically grown. This grower just says organic on it, but they are a certified organic grower. This is called HP Green Vivarium, wonderful name, down in the Santa Cruz area. Hammerhead spinach. So get your berries in, get your artichokes in. Many of the hardier herbs do terrifically well during the fall and right through the winter. And so you just have a couple here that this is Greek oregano. Generally speaking, Italian oregano, Greek oregano, Syrian oregano will all be available to you. Marjoram, sweet marjoram is the same plant as oregano. It's just selected for a little different flavor profile. It's just a little more floral. Greek oregano is a little sharper tasting. It doesn't have the sweetness that Italian oregano has. And Syrian oregano is also called za'atar, is also kind of a sharp flavored oregano. The Greek oregano grows more like a ground cover, and the Syrian oregano grows more upright like a little bush, which is kind of fun. And then various kinds of thyme. The common ones we use in cooking are called English thyme, French thyme, and Faustinoy thyme, which is Portuguese thyme. Those all grow very well during the winter, and all have very pretty flowers that bees like if you let them make flowers. You don't snip all the leaves off all the time. So think about herbs. Down here, there are a couple little herb pots. It's real easy to grow them in enough quantity that you just keep it outside the kitchen. So there's some thyme and chives and rosemary, some sage over here, and just, handy to have, and chop up a little bit and throw it in nice and fresh. This is dill. It has a, speaking of butterflies and caterpillars, somewhere on here, although he hides a lot, still very small, is an anise swallowtail butterfly caterpillar. The anise swallowtail is a big yellow swallowtail butterfly, and the dill is in the carrot family, and they eat exclusively carrot family plants. So there's a caterpillar on here munching away somewhere, or he may have moved over to the parsley, which is also in the carrot family. And so, I let them munch because I like the butterflies, and but I can't see where he is right now. He's very teeny tiny. Chives and these are bunching onions that are for making scallions. Plant these now. These are not going to make big bulbing onions. These are always going to be little bunching onions, and you just pull them out as you need them, and you've got scallions. They don't take up much room, and planting onions with other vegetables makes an odor profile that confuses even things like the cabbage white butterfly, and it's kind of like if you plant a whole bunch of different things together, the insects don't identify as readily that this is a target where I should focus my attention. It's kind of like, oh, I get a whiff of onion, I get a whiff of something else, and maybe there's greener pastures somewhere else. So it's a good idea to mix things up. If you have different plants in different pots, push them together, push the pots together, let them kind of be with each other, and make an odor profile that's going to be confusing for the bugs that want to eat them. And you can add to that confusing profile by putting some flowers in with them. These are calendulas, which is sort of the archetypical winter flower around here. They're also known as pot marigolds, not this kind of pot, growing in pots, because in cold weather, people have to protect them from the really cold frost, but we don't get cold enough to bother them at all here. They can be covered with little bits of ice and be just fine. They also come in a bright yellow color, and they have a very strong, relatively strong odor that you can smell, and that will kind of waft around, and not very many different kinds of bugs eat calendulas. And not even deer eat them very much. They'll eat the flowers, but they leave the foliage alone. But you're not going to grow your vegetables out where they're deer, because they'll eat them.
Is that an edible flower? The calendula?
Calendulas are,
yeah.
Although I don't think they're very tasty.
Mm-hmm.
These are stalk, which it gives you this wonderful sort of pastel palette, and they can get fairly tall. Stalks are actually part of the Brassica family, related to the broccoli, as are alyssum. Alyssum are one of the absolute #1 attractants of good insects to your garden. And the good news is they'll grow year round, and you should always have some alyssum growing. near your vegetables because they attract especially a type of fly called a syrphid fly or a nectar fly. And the larva of the syrphid flies actually will eat more aphids and little soft-bodied insects than your ladybugs will any day of the week. They are the premier destroyer of aphids. Well, other than parasitic wasps, which is another topic we should talk about someday, but not right now. Snapdragons, wonderful color through the winter. Another edible flower, although they have a very odd flavor. I'm not going to eat one right now. Also, these were not grown by one of our vegetable growers, but by one of our flower growers. They're not organic, and I would not just eat them off of the vine without washing them first, because they may have been treated with something somewhere along the way. And then, of course, we have violas, which come in just a raft of different colors and design markings, and are a plant that will only grow basically during the cool weather. They'll throw out a few flowers during the summer, but they're happiest starting about now and going through about April or May, and then they get tired when things get warmer. They will reseed themselves in pots or in the garden fairly readily, but since they're all kind of hybrids of various sorts, the ones that come up from seeds are going to look a little different than the ones they came from, but they'll still be pretty, and they tend toward blue more than yellow or white when they come up from seed. But absolutely wonderful for the garden. They're not a huge insect attractor, maybe just because of the way they've been developed over the years. But they are also edible. Again, I'm not going to eat this one because it's from a flower grower, not a vegetable grower. But if this were out of my garden, I would gladly eat it. And they have a very kind of sweet floral flavor to them and look wonderful again in a salad. Not a lot of them, just, the occasional little texture, flavor, and sight bomb for your salad. Now, I did want to show you that the red hot chili peppers are finally, I mean, this is Mill Valley, so our nights are close to 50 degrees every night. And no matter how hot the days are. And so it takes forever for things like this to ripen over here. Probably in the East Bay, where the nights are a little warmer, you've got better peppers than we do over here. But this is a Trinidad scorpion, which at one time was the hottest pepper in the world. The present hottest pepper in the world is the Carolina Reaper. The ghost pepper was the hottest for a while. Somebody's working on an even hotter one, I'm sure. They're ridiculous. We have a sign on them here at the nursery that says for teenagers only. It's kind of like, why would you ever grow these? Well, one pepper in a big batch of salsa will warm it up very nicely. And they're kind of an interesting looking pepper. And, so they're a novelty item in my book. I don't eat them myself or use them in cooking. But they are starting to produce, and they make a pretty little tree. One of the things I do this time of year is take the pepper plants that are still out on the sales floor, and I try to make them into little bonsai trees and put them in a little decorative pot. And we call them bonsai chili. And then they can be brought inside when the weather gets really cold, and put in a nice sunny window, something like that, to grow through the winter. And so you get this pretty little tree with the peppers ripening on it. And ideally it'll last 2 or 3 or 4 years. You put it back outside when the weather warms up again in the late spring. And you trim it a little bit each year and make it into more of a bonsai looking tree. So they're kind of fun to play with. Now, we every class we have to do a little bit of how to plant a plant, because again, there are people who may not be confident or maybe haven't done this very much, and so there's nothing tricky about it. Little plants that come in 6-packs are young and don't have expensive root systems, and you just kind of push on the bottom of the 6-pack and ease the plant out. And you can see that the roots have grown to the outside of the soil, but not like these Mizuna have been in these packs for quite a while. And so if I yank one of them out, you're going to see quite a bit more root development, although that's not bad. It's still pretty light. When the development is quite light like this, I just kind of scratch up the surface very, very gently. This is a great tool for doing that, or your fingernail, if you got a long fingernail, or pruning shears will work fine. But what I'm doing here is creating more surface area. I'm disturbing the roots a little bit on purpose so that they'll branch out. But mainly what I'm doing is creating more surface area, so that when I put this in new soil, there's lots of little interfaces between the new soil and the old soil, and the water will communicate better and the roots will grow more quickly out into the new soil. And so this is Swiss chard, by the way. And so if I go over to my garden here, I think I'll take the tomato plunge out of the middle. This is a pot that I have prepared with sloped organic potting soil, which is a very nice potting soil. A little bit of this was a pot that had potatoes in it. And so what I added to it was a product called Slope Loam Builder, which is a combination of chicken manure and compost all together. And so I put a couple of big handfuls, maybe an inch of that, and stirred around in the old potting soil. And then I added a little bit of fertilizer. This BioLive is a very nice, it's from a company called Down to Earth, very nice balanced fertilizer with added bacteria and fungi that are helpful for the plants, or the sloped tomato vegetable fertilizer, very similar. I put one or the other in that in here. I can't remember which. And I did water it a couple days ago, so it wasn't bone dry.
And that's a 15-gallon.
And this is a 15-gallon size container, which holds just about 2 cubic feet. That's the big bag of potting soil, just about fills it up like this. So having roughed up the root ball just a tiny bit, I make a little hole and I put the plant in so that it's just about at the surface, and kind of squeeze it in there, and that's it. It's planted. If it were something a little bigger, let's say this 1 gallon size artichoke, you kind of squeeze the can a little bit. And then I like to just tap it on something like that. so that it comes out easily. And you can see the roots have, grown again to the, there's some bigger roots here. Artichokes are interesting because they make these big stems that you don't see, but each of the plants here is growing out of a separate stem underground. And it's going to make more of them as it gets older. There'll be more plants coming up around it. So I can take out some of the weeds that are growing up, take out some of the little old leaves, and I'll do it over here so I don't make quite as much mess. But I'm just going to rough it up a little more than I did with the little guy, so that, again, I'm making more surface area. And I can kind of tear off the bottom of the roots so that they have to branch out into the new soil. And I dig myself a hole. And of course, I've already loaded this with the manure and compost combination and some fertilizer. So it's all ready to go. Oh, interesting. Look, here's a squash seed from, there was some spaghetti squash growing in this after the potatoes were over. So anyway, it's not a viable seed, but, and in it goes. And we put some soil back around
Look how
it.
pretty that looks,
Tuck
just
it
those
in.
two together.
Isn't that nice?
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is a Swiss chard called peppermint, which is not minty at all, but it's red. Peppermint's not red, but the stems will be very red, and so they just gave it that name to be silly. But yeah, that looks very pretty, and an artichoke will grow fine in a 15-gallon container, but it'll get very big. And as it gets bigger, you'll be able to grow fewer and fewer other things with it. So ideally an artichoke would go in the ground and have lots of room to grow because they're quite a big plant. But that, basically you rough up the roots just a little bit, plant it in some nice soil, and then I'm not going to do it here, but you water them in well, because the water will help the new soil connect with all those little interfaces that you've made available in the root ball of the plant that you've planted, and of course give it some water to sustain it while it's a new baby. And then if it gets to be 100 degrees out, throw that little piece of shade cloth or something over it during the hottest part of the day until the heat wave goes away.
Yeah, and you also planted it like an inch below the rim of the pot for water.
I always try to leave enough room that it's easy to water. I have the luxury of having a gardener who comes to my house, and sometimes I will give them the instruction to plant something for me in a pot. And one of my pet peeves is when they plant them, within a millimeter of the top of the pot, so that when I try to water it, the water just runs off around it. So that's a continuing education project that we're working on together.
Hey, Dan, actually, I have a question that is kind of tangential to this. And I know we're coming towards the end of our class, and thank you everyone who's been joining us for this and all your live questions and participation. So when you are planting in these kinds of areas, you were talking about you're amending it with some loam builder and some fertilizers. Someone was wondering, is there a timeline that you should worry about fertilizing or amending your soil before you plant? Do you have to wait any time, or how should you approach that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Compost, you don't have to worry about if it, as long as it doesn't have manure in it. Compost you can mix into your soil and plant in immediately. Manure is a little different. Fresh manure, which some people collect, you have a friend who has a horse or something like that. If you collect fresh manure, you should incorporate it and then wait. Actually, the recommendation is 60 days before you plant leafy greens that you're going to eat in from that. Things like fruit trees, not a problem, but things where the what you're eating could come in contact with the soil. The worry is pathogens in the manure, like E. coli, that you don't want to be eating, obviously. Now, the compost, the manures that you will buy from Sloat or some other bagged form of manure will usually say on them that they're composted or at least aged. And in that case, the recommendation is 30 days. But then there are also sort of the bag of chicken, little bag of chicken manure down there. There are also pelleted forms of chicken manure that are available that you can plant in immediately. I mean, you add that to your soil and you can plant immediately because they are thoroughly composted and pathogen free for sure. And it's a great product. This is a great product. This is it's chicken manure, but it is actually a balanced fertilizer. The numbers are 5, 3, 2, which you'll see is actually very similar to the BioLive. And it's competitively priced, and but the source is all poultry manure in this one, but it still is a nicely balanced fertilizer. So I've become a fan of this. The brand is Espoma. They make a number of products, but I think this chicken manure is a particularly good way to get chicken manure without having to deal with the odor, without having to worry about the pathogens. And if you're going to prepare the soil and plant right away, I would suggest this for the chicken manure portion of your soil amendment.
Very nice. And then I have one last question that we'll do before we end today. And you kind of mentioned it when you're talking about the shade cloth, but someone was asking about different kinds of veggies or leafy greens, or if they have a very shaded area, what can they maybe grow? And what would be just a good suggestion to end it off today with?
Right. Shady areas are challenging, obviously, for vegetables, but lettuces, possibly spinach, kale, and regular collards and bok choy should all do fine. They won't give you as many leaves. The plant won't be as dense as it would be in more sun. They might be a little bit leggy, but they'll still produce leaves that you can use. And but stay away from things that have to even make flowers. That don't grow broccoli in the shade, or cauliflower, or Brussels sprouts, or peas. They won't work well at all. But things where you're just eating the leaves will certainly grow in the shade. They're not going to give you the kind of production that they would in the sun, but they'll be successful. You will get a little more fungus attack if you have a particularly damp winter in the shade. You're probably going to have some problems with things rotting in place, and maybe some mildew problems. But you know, that's just part of shade gardening. And if that's what you've got available, give it a try. Experiment with different varieties and see which ones will work the best. But you know, you'll get something worthwhile out of it.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. I also want to thank everyone for joining us today for the live participation, and then anyone watching this in the future, definitely check out all of our other classes. Dan has done an amazing amount of work with us, just all different kinds of classes about veggies and seeds and all these different things. So if you have more questions or information, you can look on our YouTube page, as well as come into any of our stores and talk to our friendly staff. We would be happy to help you and talk you through your planting for the season.